The breakfast Freddie Mercury couldn't eat. And the 5 words he whispered that made Jim Hutton understand everything. November 23rd, 1991. Garden Lodge, Kensington, London. The morning light filtered through heavy curtains into a bedroom where time moved differently than it did in the rest of the world. Outside on Logan Place, buses honked. People rushed to work. London conducted its usual Saturday business with complete indifference to what was happening behind those oak doors. Inside, in a bedroom that smelled of medication and winter cold, Freddie Mercury was dying. He'd been dying for years, really, but now it was measured in hours, not days. His body, which had once commanded Wembley Stadium with a single gesture, had shrunk to almost nothing beneath silk sheets. Jim Hutton stood in the kitchen of Garden Lodge that morning, staring at a white porcelain plate. Freddie hadn't eaten solid food in days, could barely swallow water without struggle. Every rational thought told Jim that preparing breakfast was pointless. But Jim Hutton wasn't being rational. He was being loving. And love doesn't require logic. He reached for the fruit bowl and began selecting pieces with the kind of care usually reserved for choosing jewelry. A mango, perfectly ripe. Strawberries so red they looked artificial. Blackberries with that deep purple-black color that seems to absorb light. He arranged them on the plate like an artist composing a final painting. What happened in the next 10 minutes when Jim carried that plate upstairs and Freddie saw it would reveal something about how we say goodbye. About the difference between feeding someone and nourishing them. About the final gifts we give to people who are leaving. Because Freddie didn't eat a single piece of that fruit. But what he did instead broke Jim's heart and mended it simultaneously. This is the story of Freddie Mercury's last breakfast. Not the food he consumed, but the beauty he witnessed. Not about eating, but about seeing. About a man who spent his life painting the world in theatrical colors, learning to appreciate the simple brilliance of a strawberry catching morning light. Jim Hutton had been with Freddie for 7 years by November 1991. He'd met him at a nightclub in 1984, started as a friend, became a partner, and ended as a caregiver. The progression felt both natural and impossibly cruel. By late November, Garden Lodge had transformed into something between a home and a hospice. Mary Austin was there almost constantly, managing the household and shielding Freddie from the press gathering outside. Peter Freestone, Freddie's personal assistant, handled logistics and medications, and Jim provided the physical care that Freddie's deteriorating body required. They'd established routines to maintain some illusion of normalcy: morning medications, afternoon rest, evening visits from close friends. All the structures we build around death to pretend it's not happening quite yet. But Saturday, November 23rd, felt different. Jim woke up that morning with a certainty he couldn't explain. This was one of the last mornings. Maybe the last. Freddie had been unconscious more than conscious lately. When he did wake, his eyes held a distance that suggested he was already halfway somewhere else. The morphine kept the pain manageable but created a fog that made communication difficult. Still, Jim went to the kitchen. Because what else do you do when someone you love is dying? You make breakfast. You maintain rituals. You pretend tomorrow will come and require the same routines. He opened the refrigerator and looked at the contents with new eyes. Freddie loved fruit, mangoes especially, but also berries, melons, anything sweet and fresh and alive. In healthier times, Freddie would eat fruit for breakfast while reading newspapers and planning his day. Those days were gone, but the fruit remained. Jim selected pieces carefully. The mango was perfectly ripe, yielding slightly to pressure but not mushy. The strawberries were bright red, the kind of color that seems almost unreal in its intensity. The blackberries were plump and dark, each one like a tiny universe of purple-black spheres. He arranged them on a white porcelain plate. The colors seemed to vibrate against the pale ceramic. Morning light from the kitchen window made the fruit look luminous, almost supernatural. Jim stared at the plate for a moment, aware he was creating something that wouldn't be eaten but needed to exist anyway. He picked up the plate and walked toward the stairs. His hands trembled slightly, making the fruit shift. He steadied himself, took a breath, and climbed toward the bedroom where Freddie lay suspended between living and leaving. The bedroom was dim despite the morning hour, curtains drawn to keep the world at bay. A single lamp provided gentle light. The air smelled of medication, the sharp chemical scent that accumulates around serious illness. The perfume that once filled this room, Freddie's signature scent, had been replaced by this clinical odor. Freddie lay in the bed, so diminished by disease that he barely created a shape beneath the covers. His face, once so animated and expressive, had become a collection of sharp angles and pale skin. His breathing was shallow, irregular, each breath seeming to require conscious effort. Jim approached quietly, not wanting to disturb him if he was sleeping. But as Jim got closer, Freddie's eyes opened slightly. Those eyes which had commanded the attention of hundreds of thousands of people, which had conveyed such dramatic emotion on stage, looked up at Jim with recognition and something else. Awareness, perhaps. Understanding that this moment mattered in some way neither of them could articulate. Jim sat on the edge of the bed carefully, mindful of how fragile Freddie had become. He placed the plate on the bedside table where Freddie could see it. Freddie's gaze moved to the plate. His eyes, which had been distant and foggy moments before, suddenly focused with an intensity that surprised Jim. Freddie stared at the fruit, the red strawberries, the golden mango, the dark blackberries, like he was seeing color for the first time. Slowly, with effort that made every movement significant, Freddie raised one hand toward the plate. Jim started to help him, thinking Freddie wanted to eat, but Freddie's hand moved past the fruit, hovering above it without touching. Then Freddie did something Jim wasn't expecting. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his face toward the plate, and breathed in deeply. The effort of leaning forward clearly cost him, but he did it anyway, inhaling the scent of fresh fruit as if it contained something essential. His eyes closed. His face, which had been tight with the constant low-level pain that morphine couldn't entirely eliminate, relaxed slightly. For a moment, Jim saw the Freddie he remembered, not the dying man, but the person who found joy in beauty, who noticed details others missed. Freddie settled back against the pillows, exhausted by even that small movement. He reached out again, this time actually touching the fruit. His fingers, thin and fragile, traced the surface of a mango slice, not picking it up, not trying to eat it, just feeling the texture, the smooth skin, the reality of it. Then Freddie looked at Jim. Their eyes met, and something passed between them that didn't require words. But Freddie spoke anyway, his voice barely more than a whisper, each word requiring effort to form. "The color is so beautiful, isn't it, Jim?" he said, and his eyes held something that wasn't quite sadness but wasn't happiness either. Gratitude, maybe. Wonder. It's such a beautiful feeling to leave the world this colorful. Jim felt something crack open in his chest, because he understood in that moment what Freddie meant. Freddie wasn't talking about the fruit, or he was, but not only the fruit. He was talking about the yellow jacket he'd worn at Wembley, the colored lights in the hands of fans at concerts, the flowers in the Garden Lodge garden, the bright scarves and elaborate costumes, the theatrical excess that critics dismissed as too much but that Freddie understood as necessary. Freddie Mercury had spent his entire adult life painting the world in bold colors, taking the black and white of ordinary existence and splashing it with theatrical brilliance, making everything bigger, brighter, more dramatic, more alive. And now, in his final hours, he was looking at a plate of fruit and seeing his entire philosophy reflected back at him. The world was full of color. He'd added to it. And even as he prepared to leave, the colors remained. Jim couldn't speak. His throat had closed with emotion. He nodded, managed to take Freddie's hand gently, holding those fragile fingers as carefully as you'd hold a bird. Freddie's eyes moved back to the plate. He studied it for a long moment, this simple arrangement of fruit that Jim had prepared thinking about nourishment, but that had become something else entirely. A meditation on beauty. A final appreciation of simple things made extraordinary through attention. "I don't think I can eat," Freddie said after a while, his voice apologetic, as if he owed Jim an explanation for being too sick to consume food. "That's okay," Jim managed to say. "You don't have to eat. Just look. Just see it." And Freddie did. For several more minutes he looked at that plate of fruit like it contained all the beauty in the world, which in that moment perhaps it did. Eventually, Freddie asked for water, just a sip. Jim helped him drink from a glass, supporting his head, being careful with the angle so Freddie wouldn't choke. The water went down with difficulty. It would be the last thing Freddie consumed from the world he was leaving. The fruit remained on the bedside table, untouched except for Freddie's gentle exploration of its surface. The colors seemed to glow in the dim room. Red strawberries like small hearts, golden mango like captured sunlight, black-purple berries like tiny universes. Jim didn't remove the plate. It stayed there through the day, a silent witness to what was happening. Other people came and went. Mary, Peter, the doctor checking Freddie's condition. They all saw the fruit and perhaps wondered why it was there when everyone knew Freddie couldn't eat. But Jim understood. That plate wasn't about eating. It was about seeing, about bearing witness to beauty, about the last gift you can give someone, not sustenance for a body that's shutting down, but acknowledgement that they lived in a world worth noticing. As evening approached, Freddie slept more than he was awake. When he did open his eyes, they often found that plate of fruit, as if drawing some kind of comfort or meaning from its presence. Jim stayed in the room, watching over Freddie, occasionally touching his hand or adjusting his pillows. During one of Freddie's brief moments of consciousness, Jim leaned close and whispered, "Thank you for showing me how to see color." Freddie's eyes focused on him. A very small smile appeared on his face. He didn't have the energy to respond with words, but his hand squeezed Jim's weakly. Message received. Message understood. 24 hours later, Freddie Mercury died. Sunday, November 24th, 1991, at approximately 7:13 in the evening. The fruit from that Saturday morning breakfast was still in the room, though by then it had begun to lose its vibrancy. The strawberries had darkened. The mango had started to brown. The blackberries had softened. But for one morning, they had been perfect. And Freddie had seen them, had appreciated them, had understood what they represented. Years later, Jim Hutton would tell close friends about that last breakfast, about the fruit Freddie didn't eat but deeply appreciated, about the 5 words that contained an entire philosophy. Leave the world this colorful. Because that's what Freddie Mercury did. He took a world that could be gray and routine and ordinary, and he painted it in theatrical excess. He wore the yellow jacket and the crown. He sang with opera singers and symphonies. He made music videos that were small movies. He lived large and loved dramatically and created beauty wherever he went. And in his final conscious morning, looking at a plate of fruit he couldn't eat, he saw all of it reflected back to him. The colors he'd added to the world, the beauty he'd created, the brightness he'd insisted on even when critics called it too much. It wasn't too much. It was exactly right. Jim kept that porcelain plate for years after Freddie died. He couldn't bring himself to use it for ordinary meals. It had become sacred somehow, marked by that final morning when it held fruit that nourished nothing physical but everything spiritual. The plate eventually made its way into a private collection of Freddie's belongings. But the image of it, white ceramic holding bright fruit in a dying man's bedroom, remains as a testament to something important about how we leave the world. We don't take anything with us, not the houses or the awards or the money or the possessions, but we leave something behind. The colors we added, the beauty we created, the moments when we made people stop and notice something they would have otherwise missed. Freddie Mercury left the world more colorful than he found it. Not just through his music, though certainly through that, but through his entire approach to existence, through his refusal to be subtle when dramatic was more interesting, through his insistence that beauty and excess and theatrical brilliance weren't shallow, they were essential. That breakfast that wasn't eaten taught Jim Hutton something he's carried ever since. We feed each other in many ways, sometimes with food, but sometimes with beauty, with attention, with the gift of noticing. Jim had prepared that fruit thinking about nourishment, but what Freddie needed wasn't calories. It was color. It was beauty. It was one last reminder that the world held things worth seeing, worth appreciating, worth celebrating, even especially when you're leaving it. Garden Lodge still stands in Kensington. The bedroom where Freddie died has been preserved by subsequent owners who understand its significance. And sometimes, when morning light filters through those same windows, you can almost see it. The way light transforms simple things into something extraordinary. A plate of fruit becomes a meditation on color. A breakfast becomes a goodbye. A dying man becomes a teacher one final time. Freddie Mercury's last lesson was the same as his first. Look, really look. See the colors. Don't let them fade into background noise. Don't let routine blind you to beauty. The world is colorful. Brilliantly, impossibly, gloriously colorful. And if you're lucky enough to live here, maybe you can add a few colors of your own before you go. That's what Freddie did, right up until the end. He looked at fruit he couldn't eat and saw something worth celebrating. He touched a mango he couldn't taste and found meaning. He spent his last conscious morning not grieving what he was losing, but appreciating what existed. That's not just a way to die. That's a way to live. And maybe that's the real story of that final breakfast. Not that Freddie Mercury couldn't eat the food prepared for him, but that he could still see its beauty, could still find wonder in simple things, could still, even at the very end, appreciate the colors. Jim Hutton carried that plate downstairs eventually, threw away the fruit that had gone bad, washed the porcelain carefully, put it away in a cupboard where it wouldn't be used casually. But the memory of that morning never faded. Freddie's whispered words never lost their power. It's such a beautiful feeling to leave the world this colorful, a reminder that we all leave eventually. But while we're here, we have a choice about what we add. Freddie Mercury added color, brightness, beauty that refused to apologize for being excessive or dramatic or too much. And his last breakfast, uneaten but deeply appreciated, was a perfect final statement from a man who understood something essential. Life isn't just about survival. It's about seeing, really seeing, and being grateful for the colors, especially when you can't hold on to them much longer.